We are live, ladies and gentlemen, and I think Saifedean is showing up this time. In fact, he just tweeted me back. He says he needs 2 minutes. You know, a little late, but better late than never. For those of you who watched my last show, he had a conflict. Give him the benefit of the doubt. For me, my desire to learn is greater than my ego. And so, and listen, maybe I don't have the biggest channel in the world, but we are here to learn. And Saifedean's book, Bitcoin Standard, is important. It's a great book. I kind of want to wait for him before we start talking about it. And, unfortunately, the last show I promoted and told everyone about it. And we had a lot of people and he didn't come. This one, reschedule, I didn't promote it that much. So maybe we won't have as many guys ask questions. We will get to those probably at the end. So he should be here in a minute. I'm all set up here with the chat. Let me type. Sure, that's all good. All right. Well, he told me he needs 2 minutes, and that was 2 minutes ago. The clock is ticking down. I mean, I don't know. Hold on. I should be here in a minute. Let's see. What can I tell you? For those of you who don't know, the Bitcoin Standard, I don't know if I want to say the things I want to tell him, but I mean, what is great about his book is he takes these complex economic points, economic theories that other economists explain to you in 20 paragraphs. He can explain in 2 sentences. Really great at boiling down. I've seen on, I want to say these things to him when he comes on. What else can we talk about? Let's talk about EOS. People love hearing, well, someone did just ask a question about what do you think of Bitcoin versus physical gold? When it comes to a store of value, and a lot of what is in Saifedean's book is, what is money? What makes money? What are the properties that we're going to make money a good form of money, a good thing of money? If you were just going to think theoretically, what would be the best thing to use as money? And there's all these different properties. And it turns out that through history and through experimentation, people came to gold was the best form of money, because one of the most important features of money, and there's a lot of things that you can trade it and you can measure it and it doesn't fade away. But one of the most important things is that it can't be printed. It can't be diluted. You can't just make more or find more. And that's sort of the most difficult property to find in anything. And gold held that property as far as physical things on Earth. It's very rare in the Earth, hard to find. It doesn't rust and corrode. And so gold was the best form of money. But then, and here he is, the man himself, Saifedean. I was just answering someone's question about, what do you think of gold? And as you explained so beautifully, gold sort of became the best form of money. And then your book, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
I hear you. I hear you. Uh-oh, he doesn't hear me. Does everyone else hear me? Chatters. Someone's saying voice latency. People are saying there's an issue with the sound. Oh, no. How is the sound? Yes, people hear me. Can you hear me? Saifedean? Here? No? Oh. So anyways, as he said in his book, talks about what makes money good. Gold was the best form of money. Bitcoin is much better than gold as a form, as a thing that we can use as money. And that's the idea. And that's one of the early use cases of Bitcoin, is that it replaces gold. It's better than gold. And Saifedean will be great at explaining this. I hear both of you. Serious lag. Oh no. Okay, people are hearing me. Does everyone have this lag? Can you hear me?
Hey, how are you? I can
I'm
hear you now.
great. Thank you. Finally, I've got you here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and I'm really sorry about last time. I can't believe I made that mistake.
No problem. Listen, life goes on. As long as I get you, I'm excited. When your book, the thing about your book that gets me is I read, when I read about, some of these economic books, great points, interesting, but you have to read 3 chapters and it's just ponderous to get the point. And you seem to have this knack of, within 2 sentences, you make this point that others can't make. And I'm seeing on the internet and people on Twitter, something that I see with your book, I don't see others doing it. Everyone's like, this is my favorite quote. This is my favorite quote. And I have, like, one of mine is my favorite quote. I don't see other people doing it. And it's because I think you're able to say this thing in 1 sentence that other people can only explain in chapters. Were you aware of that, or when you were writing the book, you're like, wow, this is going to be different than other books trying to explain this stuff, or you know what I mean?
I mean, I sort of sense that I've had it in me because I've worked in teaching in academia for a while, and my students tell me that I'm a good teacher quite regularly, to be honest, to blow my own horn. So they'd say, generally, I'm good at explaining things and breaking them down. So, and I'm good at writing them as well. And that was part of the reason why I thought it would be good for me to write this book, because Bitcoin is a very hard thing for people to wrap their heads around. And once you understand it, you're trying to communicate it to people. And so I felt that, given that I'm relatively good at this communication business, and that there aren't that many people who are into Bitcoin who get it, who are writing books about it, I think this might be a good opportunity. I'm very glad to hear that you enjoyed it. It makes me really happy whenever people I don't know tell me this. It's very satisfying, and it makes me feel like I've done something useful with my life.
Well, I majored in economics at the University of Michigan, and I knew they taught too much about communism. But I wasn't sure. I knew there was something missing, and I wasn't sure what it was. And literally until your book, I finally was like, oh, I get it. Like, we were only learning Keynesian economics. And it just, so you sort of opened up a world to me of study. And then I realized, they taught nothing about Austrian economics too. And so you really sort of opened that door to me, and I think other people as well. So, so the first thing I wanted to ask, as far as this, because I see so much on Twitter about, this is my favorite quote. Have you noticed, is there any sort of quote or part of the book that most people are sort of excited about and retweeting and telling people? Have you noticed a trend? Because a lot of them I see, it's always something different. It touches people in different ways. But you've seen most popular quotes?
I'm not entirely sure. It's a tough one because as you said, it does happen quite a bit. So I'm not really sure which one has been the most popular. I think actually maybe there was one thing in the prologue or in chapter 1. I'm not sure if it was chapter 1 or the prologue, where I say, look, this isn't investment advice. This isn't, I'm not asking you to buy. If you're interested in getting into Bitcoin, it doesn't matter. The real investment is not how much money you buy, because that could all be how much money you spend on buying Bitcoin or how many dollars you spend. The real investment is to understand it. This is really, and I think a lot of people have picked up on that, particularly on the aspect of personal responsibility. And that's, I think, this is one thing that Bitcoin has done to me personally, and I think it's doing to a lot of other people. It's forcing you to take your computer security and privacy much more seriously than you did before, because pretty much everybody except for very seasoned and hardened nerds and crypto researchers and people who were considered generally crazy on the fringes of society until a few years ago now are considered visionaries. But other than that, pretty much everybody just went by convenience. You just pick whichever app or website or platform allows you the most convenience, and you take very little care about the kind of information and sensitive data that you share. And that's, that's been the downfall of a lot of people. But Bitcoin forces you to start realizing, the internet is not all, it's not all going to be cat memes forever. There are more important things that are going to take place on the internet. And unless you start taking your security seriously, and unless you start assuming responsibility online in the same way that you need to assume responsibility as an adult in the real world, things can get ugly, as we're seeing more and more.
All right. And I have a bunch of questions here. I'm trying to get things that were not easily apparent in the book or that you didn't answer. And before I get to that, I just want to say again, I've said it before to people, I just was with people yesterday. Whenever I talk to someone, I say, just buy this book, The Bitcoin Standard, and read it. When it comes to education, you can go to college and spend how many thousands of dollars? This thing is $12. If you have any interest in what's going on with any cryptocurrency, not just Bitcoin, you got to get this book. So I wanted to get that pitch there before we lose people with talking about economics, because people love when we talk about moon, when, Lambos, but when you get into history of money, some people seem to fall off. But we've got our diehards, I'm sure that'll stick in. So the first thing I wanted to ask you about, my favorite quote is, I'll read, economic logic clearly shows how recessions are the inevitable outcome of interest manipulation in the same way shortages are the inevitable outcome of price ceilings. And I understand this. We learned even at the University of Michigan that, manipulating price, if the price is too high, there'll be an oversupply. If the price is too low, there'll be a shortage. I understand that. And your idea, I do understand that if you manipulate the interest rate lower, you'll have overinvestment and therefore a boom and then a bust. But how do you explain, why is it always sort of a too much investment? Like, what if the interest rates were lower and then people invested everybody used that extra money to make great things? Isn't it possible that it kind of is okay? I mean, I'm not even saying I'm for manipulating interest rates, but I feel like you're sort of saying it's sort of mathematically, like, it can't work ever. Like, is it just, I've always viewed it too as increasing risk, by lowering the interest rate, there's a risk, but you seem more emphatic that it just never can work. And how do you explain that?
Yeah, well, to explain that, we need to use our old friend Austrian business cycle theory. And effectively, and I say this in the book, the only people who have come up with a meaningful and useful business cycle theory are, in my opinion, the Austrians. So Mises, Hayek, and Rothbard all worked on this, and it's really quite. It's not something that's very straightforward and simple that can be explained in a few minutes, although I'll try. But it's quite foundational in the sense of I can't really consider that somebody can possibly talk about economic affairs without having an understanding of Austrian business cycle theory. So what they effectively say is that the interest rate, and this is not just the theory itself, but in general, the interest rate is the price of capital. It's the price at which people are borrowing and lending. So you would think in a free market, if you had a free market for loans, you would have open lending and borrowing. Anybody is free to lend at whatever price they want, and anybody's free to borrow at whatever price they want. But of course, the tricky part is finding somebody who'll take the other end of the deal. So from this, just like with Apple sellers, there will be sellers and buyers. All the sellers would like to charge a high price, and all the buyers would like to charge a low price. But at the end of the day, they need each other, and they're going to need to find a middle ground. And that's the general sort of interest rate level that emerges. Obviously, it varies with the risk of every single individual business will have its own risk, and the interest rate will vary, but there'll be some sort of general level around which interests cluster, and that'll be determined through how much people are saving versus how much people want to borrow and how much people want to undertake investments with this money. So the question is, what happens if you artificially manipulate this signal? In other words, you say that we're going to offer a 2% interest rate instead of, imagine the price was 5, and instead the government mandates that the price must be 2% interest rate. Well, in that case, the people who save, people who want to put money aside in order to save it in the future, or invest it and have it given to investors, they're going to have less of an incentive because they're going to be getting something like 2% instead of 5. So it just makes sense, you know, if I told you you're going to get 5%, you're more likely to save than 2%. So overall, the amount of capital that's going to be put aside for saving is going to decline. In other words, people are going to consume more. On the other hand, because the price of interest has gone down, the amount of people who want to borrow will rise, right? If you had to borrow at 5%, you'd likely borrow less than if you could borrow at 2%. So the number of borrowers increases and the number of savers decreases. Now, it's, you know, the trick of the layer of money, the fact that there's a layer of money out there being traded can mask us from the reality of just the pure physical restraints of the world in which we exist, in which, you know, capital goods are just not, they're not things that we can conjure up from the sky by wishing. Capital needs, it is extremely intricate process that needs time and accumulation. And so when you think about it, when real savings decline and borrowing increases, the only way that that can be financed is through the debasement of the currency, one way or the other. In other words, the increase of the supply of the currency. And that's why the money supply continues to increase, because the monetary system and the banking system, you know, it creates money whenever it lends. So the process of lowering interest rates increases lending and then therefore increases the money supply. And that's certainly one way of doing things. But the problem with it is that the long run effect is, you know, the long run effect is that it's going to be inflationary, and people think this is a real issue and problem. And of course it is. But most people, you know, when they simplify the Austrian business cycle theory, they think that it's just only about inflation. And so they say, oh, well, you know, the Austrians are just so obsessed with this 2-3% inflation. They think it's the end of the world. And that's just silly. It's not just the 2-3% inflation, whatever it is. It's the impact that this has on the capital market. It's that when everybody is able to borrow at a lower interest rate, people will borrow and speculate on all kinds of stupid crap, as we continue to see repeatedly. Because easy money is dumb money. You know, if you haven't had to work really hard to get dumb money, you're far more likely to do stupid things with it. And so we see this happening over and over again, that the way to think of it is that the manipulation of the interest rate downward gives the entrepreneurs the impression that they have far more capital than they actually have, while giving savers the idea that they've also saved far more than they actually have. And so everybody goes and consumes more, which actually reduces the amount of capital available.
That's right. That's one part I was missing. I forgot the other, you know, I knew people would invest more with the lower interest rate, but I forgot also people will save less. And it's really like the, just as, it's sort of that how you talk a lot about time preference, and time is, you know, the amount of time delay is so important, and manipulating prices today, you know, we can understand that, and manipulating interest rate is really just the same thing as manipulating prices today, but it's not today, it's some point in the future. And so it introduces a lot of variables, which I think makes it hard to understand, but it's really the same concept, which is, I think, why I love your quote there. So, all right. And so now, one quick thing on that before I get to the next question. This thing, you know, business, I feel like, and I've seen it written other ways about calling it the credit cycle instead of the business cycle, because I think the Keynesian idea is that, well, businesses just go crazy and overinvest and then they fall, and, you know, we blame it on businesses. Whereas it seems to me the issue really is the credit cycle, and that it's not, you know, if there was no interest manipulation, some businesses will do stupid things and others won't, but would they all do it together? And do they really go through these cycles? I mean, me as a businessman, I'm happen to be calm and I don't borrow lots of money, so I don't go through cycles. I just plug along. You know, is there really a business cycle? Isn't it a credit cycle? Or are those two different things? Or is that just two words trying to say the same thing, and I prefer calling it credit cycle? Or are those, can I call it a credit cycle? Is kind of my question.
I mean, I guess I would agree. Yeah, you could call it credit cycle, and I think Hayek used that term. I think it was one of the titles of his book, Monetary Theory and the trade cycle, that it was. But I think, yeah, if you call it the credit cycle, then you're also kind of implicitly adopting the Austrian explanation of it, because the Austrian explanation argues that it's caused by credit. So there are other explanations out there that say it's technological. Some new technology comes along and it puts old technologies out of a job, but that's just completely inapplicable. So if you're assuming that there's a monetary aspect to it, then you're coming into the realm of mostly Austrian explanations. There are some others that are monetary, but the only truly coherent explanation of the theory, of the monetary trade theory, I think, is the Austrian monetary explanation. Yeah.
So after reading your book and my eyes were opened, I actually contacted University of Michigan. I don't know that I got, some really important person there, but I was just like, what are you still only teaching? And they only teach Keynesian economics. And even the guy on the phone I talked to explained, well, if you want to get ahead in economics, you have to do the party line. So it's sort of like, if you're a teacher and you want a career, you have to talk about this stuff. And the Austrian economics, that's not part of it. So if you study that, you have a dead end and you might lose your job. That's the way it works. But their explanation beyond sort of that, that's a sort of a sad explanation, even though he mentioned it. But his other thing was, that's not mainstream. This Austrian economics, he sort of positioned it as it's a fringe. There's some people who think that, but it's not. It's sort of a fringe thought that's out there, and so we don't really bother with it. And maybe that's true, But on the other hand, I was thinking, is it really? I don't know. Do you have, any information on number of people who, would be called Keynesian or label themselves, and number of people that call themselves? I'm seeing a lot of with the Austrian economics now with Bitcoin, and it's big, and maybe because of who I follow on Twitter and such. But is it a decent size following? And I assume it's growing now, but is it only 10% of people interested in economics study Austrian economics, or is it higher? Do you have any info on that?
No, it's not 10%. It's way lower.
It really is.
Yeah. I mean, the way to think of it is in terms of academics and university professors, people with PhDs in economics, it's definitely less than 1%. But, there you have to understand that it's part of the job description. I mean, it's not like it's a giant conspiracy in as much as it is self-selection. If you're an Austrian economist, you don't think that government interference in the economy is a good thing. And so therefore, that just automatically almost precludes you from the majority of jobs that are at universities and at research programs related to universities, because the majority of economic studies at universities is government funded or Fed funded. And so therefore, not through any sort of conspiracy, but, this is government funded. And the point of government funding it is that they want policy relevant implications. They want to be told, how can we get unemployment down? How can we get inflation down? How can we, get rid of this bad thing or improve that thing? And so the job of the economist is to provide policy recommendations. So once you've framed it that way, then it doesn't really make sense for the Austrian. That puts the Austrian at a severe disadvantage, because his policy recommendation is, go home and close down whatever it is that you're doing. The policy recommendation for the Department of Agriculture is don't have a Department of Agriculture. It's not exactly likely to get you funded by the Department of Agriculture.
And you're at, I think you said Lebanese University, or are you in Lebanon? And is that, do they have a different view, or how'd you get a job? I mean, how did you, where are you teaching, and how did you avoid that trap?
I went to an American university in Lebanon, but I think outside the US, it's far more, it's a little bit more relaxed, just because, it's there's not that close of a connection between the universities and government. And so it's far easier for you to speak your mind and do what you want. And in general, I genuinely find the academic atmosphere in Lebanon to be far more suitable for somebody like me than in the US. I mean, in the US, there's a party line and you have to toe it. In Lebanon, nobody really cares. You know, you're as long as you just turn up, do your job, grade your midterms and exams on time, and, you know, don't hurt any other students, then, you know, you're doing your job. As long as you do your job properly, that's what they hire you for. They don't hire you to have the correct ideological views, and they don't care.
Well, I remember when again, at Michigan, and I remember microeconomics, I don't know what it was, 202, or it was some higher level of microeconomics that I had to take. And I heard such nightmare stories about this course. And I was just like, oh my God, this sounds horrible. And so in the summer, I said, you know what, I'm going to take it at that one course at this school near me that's known as an easier school, because I just didn't want to deal. And I went to that school, and they were sort of teaching the same exact thing. And I'm like, why is this, like, what's the difference? It's the same material. And then, but I found out the difference is they don't really grade it to, they don't really pay attention. They just give you an A or a B. Like, I didn't really, you know, have to work as hard, or I could just sort of do nothing and still pass. I think the difference between a good university and a bad one is they actually grade you or pay attention. But anyways, that's an aside. Okay, so next topic. You talk in the book about, I got these dates if I got it right, 1871 to 1913 as this great period where the world was kind of on the gold standard. And I can understand how, you know, that makes the economy better because everyone's on one standard pricing system for international trade. And, you know, I get your points on why that was good. But at the same time, I know, you know, fractional reserve banking, as I've been reading, is not something new to the Federal Reserve. It's been around for a couple hundred years. So although everyone was on the gold standard, I believe at that time, people were still issuing more paper against the gold that they had, which again screws up the money supply. It almost seems to me just another form, you know, your book is sort of the history of money is the history of people debasing money in every way until the money's destroyed. And so in that period that you talk about as being a great period was based on gold, but there was still a lot of fractional reserve banking. And shouldn't that have sort of screwed up this period where the economies were great?
It did. That's why we don't have a gold standard anymore. So, you know, it was much better than what we have today in terms of it being more of a free market, because there was no central bank standing there as a lender of last resort, which forced the banks to be very careful about how much they lend. And that's why there were relatively few recessions during that period, but there were still recessions during that period. And the reason for that was, you know, credit expansion can still happen in the fractional reserve banking. So then the problem was that it would cause a panic, and that was the 1907 panic. And then as a result of that, you know, the idea was that, okay, we need the lender of last resort in order to fix things in case there's a crisis like in 1907. So, of course, the only thing that did was just create moral hazard. So now banks could just go and expand far more their credit beyond their reserves because they had a lender of last resort. So, of course, this just made banks take more risk, which meant that the next crash was even bigger. That's why the 1929 crash is much bigger than anything that happened in the gold standard era.
Have you read the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island?
No, I have not.
So that book, there's a lot of weird conspiracy things mixed in. You got to be careful about that. But he has a real good, decent history, I think, on fractional reserve banking, and sort of gives the impression, it might be something to look at. He really, I think, assuming his history is right, that there was a fair amount of fractional reserve and banking panics and just mismanagement of money all through the 1800s. That you didn't mention that much in your book. So I'd be curious if you know, obviously if you didn't read it, it's hard to reference it. But so that's why I was curious on that. So, okay, and just a couple things here. I saw someone chatting. What's a link for the book? I put it into the chat. You know, go on Amazon. The Bitcoin Standard, Saifedean Ammous. Oh, am I pronouncing this correct? How do we pronounce your name?
Oh, so Safe for short is what you can call me, but I pronounce the correct pronunciation of my full name is Saifedean Ammous.
Okay, I'm gonna paste that in here too. Should be pretty easy to find. 60. I'm looking on Amazon. 62, and it's got full 5-star. I saw somebody early.
There are a couple of 1-star no pointers.
What's that?
There are a couple of 1-star no pointers.
I saw somebody at the beginning did a 1-star long review that I found amusing, but the reviews, because yeah, like I said, I think this book, it's just important. So anyways, I put the link in there, and all right. So next thing is, this whole, I love the world. Like, he led me to a new world. And I knew about Bitcoin maximalists, but following you and then finding others, it's just funny. The Bitcoin maximalists that, like, the impression I get is that Bitcoin is the only cryptocurrency that will survive. And I think you do think that. So I want to try to, my belief is that when it comes to money, and certainly a world currency to compete with the dollar, compete with the dollar and the yen, to reform the banking industry and all this, it's Bitcoin. I don't think there's any other competitors, nobody close. As far as that's concerned, I'm a Bitcoin maximalist, but I do believe that there will be other uses for tokens and this crypto economics to create a business. And so first, so just to clarify a little further, like, for example, the example people give is like, well, imagine you could have an Uber and, you have people who want cars and there's drivers and they just can get connected without there being a third party. And there's also, I know there's this company, they're trying to compete with Amazon, having decentralized storage, and they're going to use their token to help, create the economics within their little ecosystem. Maybe these things won't be as big as Bitcoin in any way.
No, it's not just that they're going to not be big. It's that they're fundamentally unworkable. It's completely meaningless design. I think the best way of thinking of it is that it's cargo cult engineering. You're familiar with the story of cargo cult science?
No, what is that?
You know the scientist, the physicist Richard Feynman?
Yes.
I think it was Richard Feynman, yeah. So I think he popularized that story in one of his TV shows. So the story was that during World War II, the U.S. military had used some island in the Pacific as an airstrip and landing base. And they had an air base there, and they had a bunch of soldiers, and they had airplanes coming in and out. And so they used to give the locals in the island a bunch of gifts. Some of the stuff that they bring from home, they would give it as goodwill to the locals. So then, for a few years this went on, then the war ended and the American soldiers left and the airstrip was left abandoned. So what did the locals do? They wanted their probably candy, the horrible sugar stuff that the Americans used to give them. And so, the locals wanted to get that candy back. So what did they do? Well, they went to... They'd go to the airstrip where the airplanes used to land and perform the same kind of rituals that the air control tower people would perform back when there were airplanes. And the idea was that if you light a fire and you stand there waving a flag and making, visible signals for the airplane, then airplanes will fall from the sky and come and bring you chocolate and candy. This, for me, after having looked at this field for quite a few years, I'll tell you, this is my honest and genuine assessment of every single project that uses the word blockchain. Every single one that uses the word blockchain that is not Bitcoin is exactly this. They have absolutely no reason to be using a blockchain. And the only reason they're using it is they're just copying the rituals of what Bitcoin does. Bitcoin is the only one that has a reason to be using a blockchain. A blockchain is an extremely expensive, inefficient, cumbersome, slow, crappy way of doing things. The only reason it works for the case of Bitcoin is because it aims for 100% reliability only. It is crappy for performance. It is crappy for optimization. It is crappy for efficiency. It can only do process transactions in batches of 10 minutes with one confirmation. You probably should wait for more than one confirmation. You cannot compare it to the state of the art in any of these
Let me give you a few examples. Maybe tell me specifically.
No, please not. Please don't. Please, I've really spent years going over these examples, and I've studied them, and I've written a paper about them, and I go in detail. I mean, obviously,
how about just one idea, which is I hear.
I'll tell you what. No, really. This is going to be a far more constructive use of our time. There's an infinite amount of cargo cult rituals that you could come up with and say that, well, maybe if we do this, but none of that changes the fact that none of this is how engineering actually happens. If you look at how actually engineering happens, people start off with a problem and then they try and find the best way to solve it. Every blockchain project out there starts off with the blockchain and just thinking, how do we get the word blockchain onto something that can get us more funding? And so it's a non-starter. But the point is this. The reason why I know they're all going to be failed is that if you, the only thing that a blockchain can control, the only thing that a blockchain can be able to tell you with any sort of reliability without having to trust in a third party is the ownership of the token in the blockchain. That's it. That's the only thing that it can tell you, the local native token. And the only one that does that, the only blockchain that does that reliably without having to rely on any single trusted third party is Bitcoin. So if there's, to the extent that you can use a blockchain for anything, it will be to move little bits of Bitcoin around. That's it. Any kind of application that tells you we're going to be applying it for something else in the real world, where we're going to be using blockchain for data storage, that's ridiculous. There's no way you're going to meet
among different within one industry, everyone shares one database. That idea is just
this idea of shared databases has been around since the 1970s. Shared databases is not something interesting or important. It's been around since the 1970s. It's been commercially available for anybody in the world since 2005 or 6, I think, when Google Docs came out, maybe even earlier. So, Google Docs is a shared ledger. This is all the distributed ledger. You can have 10 people access the same Excel sheet from 10 places, and you can keep track of every single change that anybody makes to them. And you're trusting in a third party. All of these involve trust in a third party. And the notion that you're going to build a blockchain that allows you to have a distributed ledger that doesn't trust in a third party is only tenable in the case of Bitcoin. That's it. All the other ones, you can't say that there's no trusted third party. There is a trusted third party who could, at the end of the day, just basically scrap the whole thing, as we saw in the case of Ethereum, as we see with all the bank chains that can be edited by the banks using them at any point in time. It's a complete dead end in terms of engineering. There's not going to be any.
Now, IBM is not trying to say there'll be no trust. It's sort of a permission, but like for a shipping container company with all these different steps, they can streamline, and
it's just adding a bunch of buzzwords in order to get people funding. I mean, the reality is, look, anytime you're going to include the blockchain on anything else, let's say shipping or goods or real estate, the whole point of having the blockchain is that we want to get rid of the third party, right? Well, linking the blockchain to ships that are moving then just reintroduces a third party who's going to have to verify the connection between the actual physical good or the ship or the house or the car and the blockchain. So the real reason that you can understand why this stuff is just not going to work is what happens if we have real estate or ships on the blockchain and then somebody loses their private key. Somebody loses the key that allows them access to that asset. So what are we going to do with that giant container ship with $3 million of goods because you lost your private key? Do we just go and sink it? Or what do we do with your house if you've lost the private key? So do we demolish the house? Do we not stop anybody? Does somebody get to take it away from you and then sell it again? No, obviously the ownership of the house is going to be secured by you, by your guns, or by the army that you hire, or by the police, or whoever it is. And they're not going to give a shit about a blockchain at the end of the day. The who owns the house is definitely something that is not, it cannot be just left to software to determine,
What
because
about
software don't stop people
additional contracts on money, like sort of smart money, smart contracts? Do you think that'll be
Yes,
built on
exactly.
Bitcoin?
As long as it is on Bitcoin, as long as you're actually doing contracts that involve the movement of Bitcoin, like multi-sig contracts and all those things, yeah, these are the only real forms of smart contracts that'll be around. To the extent that there will be smart contracts, they will be on the Bitcoin blockchain, and that's it. And the only working example of a smart contract I think that we have is multi-sig at this point. Multi-sig transactions, that's it.
Did you go through what I think a lot of people do? You discover Bitcoin, you're excited, then you're like, wow, there can be more things, go off to all the coins, and then sort of come back to Bitcoin. And someone like me, I'm still hanging on to these other ideas.
I know, but you have to
understand. Or you never believe in any of these other ones?
No, of course, I went through that as well for a while. But you have to understand, that I went through that a long time ago. And so it's been generations of people, particularly on Twitter. I mean, part of the reason that I'm pretty cranky on Twitter is that, I just can't be nice to people coming at me, noobs. Every month over the last 3-4 years, I've had somebody come at me and throw at me this idiotic internet analogies from the 1990s. Oh, but Bitcoin is just the MySpace, and then all the other currencies are the Facebook, or Bitcoin is just the AOL of the internet. It's one limited platform, but Ethereum is going to be like the World Wide Web or some stupid bullshit like that. And it's just been generation after generation of one scam after the other, and one coin after the other, one other project coming after the other. And I come across as being an asshole when I talk about this, but really, I don't owe my time to anybody. And people get really emotionally invested in their stupid shitcoins and blockchain projects. And then they just, I'm not interested in your project, but they're definitely really interested in proving to me how I am wrong. That, all of the shitcoins that you've looked at and the other stupid blockchain projects that went to nothing over the years, you were right. Okay, maybe you're right, but my shitcoin is special. My distributed ledger is going to change things, and good for you. Maybe you will. I'm more than happy to miss out on the next Bitcoin after having wasted so much time studying all the pretenders. I'm quite happy to be at the level of skepticism that treats these things like Nigerian email prince scams at this point.
What about Bitcoin Cash? What's your short on that? Also, just ridiculous.
Just another stupid shitcoin.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one as well. So, okay. So now, again, back to, my Michigan education was lacking. And I wonder if you have if you were going to pick, and maybe this is a hard question, I don't know if you have it on the top of your head, but to make up for all what I was not taught in economics at the University of Michigan, are there any books, maybe 3 books, or even if it's just one book, that you would recommend that somebody read to get a good idea of either Austrian economics or just, other than your book, an understanding to get that economics education I should have got? Do you have any books that you think are the best to read in this topic?
Well, I think a good place to start is Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. And Henry Hazlitt is an absolutely brilliant artist of a writer. He's got an incredible, if you think I write well, wait until you read Henry Hazlitt. He's going to ruin me for you. He's very good at communicating complex ideas really well, and so I think for beginners he's arguably the best communicator of economic ideas. So I would start with his book,
Economics in One Lesson here by Henry Hazlitt. I just put the
yeah, I'm pretty sure you can find the PDF online for free available, and if not, I'm sure you can find torrents or things like that. It's a great book.
880 reviews, 4.5 stars. Not bad.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other books?
Yeah. So then, once you've got that, then I would recommend getting into reading Rothbard and Hayek. Mises, I think, might be a little bit more complicated for people to read. Rothbard and Hayek are a little bit more accessible. Ammous is a little bit more difficult, so maybe keep it for the sort of advanced level, but for intermediary, go with the Rothbard and Hayek. I particularly like, as a beginner, Hayek's The Use of Knowledge in Society. That short paper, 15 pages, absolutely mind-blowing. It's the paper that gave us Wikipedia. It's Jimmy Wales credits reading that paper with why he came up with Wikipedia. So I urge you to look that up and understand the story behind Wikipedia, and I think it will teach you a wonderful lesson about how Austrians view economics and the spontaneous order and how markets function.
It's Use of Knowledge in Society by Hayek?
Yes.
And is that, you said it's a paper, it's not a book? Or
yeah, it's just a 15-page paper. You can also find it online for free. Another one for Hayek, there's The Pretense of Knowledge, a speech that he gave when he received the Nobel Prize. And it's pretty. It's not a very long speech, but it's pretty damning about the difference between about the problems with modern macroeconomics, what he calls the pretense of knowledge. Then there's Murray Rothbard, who's excellent in. He's got an enormous amount of books. You'll struggle to finish them before you die if you set your mind at it. So it's really hard to choose. But I would say if you want something simple, What Has Government Done to Our Money is excellent. And if you want something a little bit more complicated, there's America's Great Depression, which I think is very useful. But then if you want really the full course menu, if you really want to learn economics from A to Z, from top to bottom, everything, and you want to just end up knowing it, then just read Man, Economy, and State. Murray Rothbard's Man, Economy, and State. It's only about 1,500 pages or so, but well worth it.
Is it anything? I have this one book, and I really like it, but it's like trudging through mud. Money, Bank Credit, and Economic Cycles by Jesus Huerta de Soto. You familiar with that?
Yes. Yeah, I would have probably recommended this one next.
So that book, and so I like it. If I make it through a chapter, I'm really happy I read that. I learned something. It's got such detail. It's just painful. And I'm on chapter 5. Have been for a month now. And it's getting into the economic cycle stuff I want to get, but it's so detailed.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you should rewrite that book if you could, and just make it easier for me. I think if you read Rothbard, you'll be able to get a lot of the ideas in De Soto's book, but in a much more easily digestible format. In this one, What Has Government Done to Our Money? That one would sort of take care of this book for me.
Well, I wouldn't say take care of it. It's a much more simplified treatment of it, but it's a good start. There's also, for Rothbard, there's also an essay called Economic Depressions, Their Cause and Cure. That's also very good.
Oh, sorry. What was that title again?
Economic Depressions, Their Cause and Cure.
And that was Rothbard too. Okay. Yeah, it's also, I find it hard to even skim the book because it's just, I don't know, I'm having trouble. So, all right, well, thank you for those. And as far as the history of economics, it seems like it's sort of a new, with that book, they talk about the history of just deposits and the law between deposits and not doing fractional reserves. And that goes back thousands of years, to Greece and Rome. But a lot of the economic study that we talk about now with our complex economic system with so much going on, is most of that relatively, these authors in these books within 100 or so years? Or are there important economists who were beyond 100 or 200 years ago? Or is it sort of that, new? I guess 200 years, not everyone would call that new. But was there much economic writing and things before?
Yeah, if you study the Austrian tradition, you see how it builds on hundreds and thousands of years of economic scholarship going all the way back to the ancient Greeks. And you see there's a continuation there, from ancient Greek philosophers to an Arab economist, Ibn Khaldun, whom I've been influenced by. He was around, I think, was it 1,000 years ago or 800 years ago or something like that? I forget the exact date. Ibn Khaldun is his name. He's a pretty famous sociologist and economist, and he wrote a book that was, I mean, it's known as the first social science treatise possibly ever written. It's a history book in sociology and economics, and his ideas, I think, they continue to percolate. Then you see the tradition continue through the same ideas. The same tradition continues towards this what is called the scholastics, the scholastics in Spain, who were Catholic priests who studied economics, and then you have the French classical tradition with economists like Say and Baptiste and Turgot. And then when France lost that liberalism and went down the path of insane socialism, you find the Austrians and the Swedes really were the primary schools towards the turn of the 19th century. And there's also the Scottish tradition, Adam Smith and what's his name, Adam Ferguson, and I think it's Adam Ferguson. Yeah, Smith, Ferguson, Hume, and these guys. I'm obviously doing none of these people justice by talking about them like they were my buddies, but I think if you replay this, Google these names, you will come across an enormous world of fun tales and stories and economic lessons.
So speaking of fun, someone posted a comment which reminds me of something I found more hilarious than this person did. This person says the only thing they didn't like in your book, the ad personam, I guess ad hominem. I don't know if it was just your attack on Keynes. I enjoyed thoroughly. I mean, I just was so pleased. And for those who haven't read it, I mean, beyond the fact, to me, the two main things that I love to reference if I'm going to talk about Keynes, I say, just beyond the fact that he never studied economics and that he spent much of his adult life traveling around the world. And I looked up your resources to see, his letters where he refers to he would travel and reserve boy and bed, which I'm not sure how relevant. Just because you travel around and want boy in bed doesn't mean you can't be good at economics. But and then so this person said nothing wrong with hedonism in a liberal society, and I don't know. Do you want to talk about your complete destruction of Keynes in this book and how some of it was a little personal and not just on the economics?
Yeah, but I think, the concept of time preference is all pervasive in life in the way that we take our decisions. And I don't think you can separate the person's morality from their time preference. And for me, and I think this is, I think morality is one of the most astonishing or one of the most refined products of a low time preference is morality and behaving well towards others and not violating others, because you want to live in a world in which these sort of things don't happen. You realize that doing those things is not just bad for those people, it's bad for you, it's bad for the kind of society you live in. And, it's doing immoral things, doing things that are hurtful towards others are destructive for you, not just to them. And I think this profound level of understanding is something that takes a certain amount of ability to think about the long term. Whereas on the other hand, people who are unable to think of the long term are unable to understand these sort of things. They're unable to have empathy, and they act based on their instincts initially. So you're unable to suppress your instincts when they turn up. And so, I mean, I'm not running for election here, so frankly, I don't give a shit if your friend likes it or not.
That's not my friend. It's commenter. Yeah, he may be a wonderful person, but
yeah, I mean, this is going to sound a little bit rude, but I don't care what anonymous people think about what I wrote of the book. You know, people who just think that, you know, well, I didn't like that you attacked Keynes. Well, you know what? I'm not telling you to spend the rest of your life idolizing my book. My book is a communication of a bunch of ideas, and maybe you should ask yourself why this makes you uncomfortable rather than coming and attacking me, a stranger.
Well, he did say in this amazing book, I think he loves your book, but what about that? So let's, you know, we don't have to destroy him as well. But
no,
one
okay,
thing that,
no, but I'll just say this. I mean, I look, I'm not a curmudgeon. I'm not anti-happiness, and I recognize that time preference is never zero. It's always positive, meaning that people will always prefer enjoyment today than tomorrow. And of course, there's no right and wrong answer about what it is, what you should be enjoying or not. So there's nothing wrong with hedonism. There's nothing wrong with having fun. But there is something wrong with, you know, when your conception of fun reaches to a point where you can't see anything wrong with violating the lives and the bodies of others. And in this case, you know, it's not just that he was assaulting people, he was assaulting children, effectively child prostitutes, child slaves, who were, you know, enslaved for the pleasure of sick people like him. So I think that speaks deeply, profoundly about the person, but more importantly about the time preference of the person. And I don't think you can understand his economic ideas in isolation from this kind of
your book actually made me reframe my thinking. You know, he on one quote that he coined, which I used to think, oh, that's funny, and it was in the long run, we're all dead. And I used to think, you know, the value of that comment is, you know, don't think too long term because you'll be dead. But then then in reference to your book, I started thinking, well, what is the long run? I mean, you know, in this crypto space, we talk about investing or investing in general. It's usually 5 or 10 years. And I'm 50 already. I'm pretty old. And so if the long run is 5 or 10 years, I'm not dead. And in fact, and then 20 years is really pretty long-term thinking. I'm not dead. And especially a lot of people watching the show are a lot younger. You know, we're not dead in the long run, and we should think about the long run. And really, then I started seeing that quote as being famous is yet another sort of tool to getting people just, it's all about the here and now, you know? And I started thinking that comment seems funny, but maybe it's not as funny as I thought it was.
And I think there's something deeply profound here that, you know, the sort of person who is viewed as the authority on how we should live our lives economically by your media and your university and your establishment. Well, you know, economic decision making and time preference is pervasive into all areas of life. And so you can't look and say, well, this is the guy who's telling us spend now and not worry about the future. And, you know, not think that his own decisions are not affected by that, and not think that the consequences of his own decisions are not relevant to that. I think it's extremely relevant. And I find it really astonishing that, you know, we have in his own words, you know, not only is he committing this heinous crime against these people, these children, but he writes about it like it is as a recreational vacation. And, you know, on the other hand, we live in a world in which, you know, people get crucified for saying anything that's even remotely slightly construed as being politically incorrect, and people go crazy about that. And, you know, it's I know this particularly as an Austrian economist, because, you know, pretty much every single Austrian economist, you've had everything that they've ever written combed for any sort of old language that doesn't sound extra politically correct today in 2018, and then that gets parodied around to say, well, look at these evil old white racist men and how terrible they are. And, you know, you crucify entire schools of thought just by finding one tiny little bit of crime think against one author who's just a slip of a tongue. It doesn't even have to be in economics anymore. But I mean, it is a tool used to silence people whose opinions are inconvenient. And yet, you know, Keynes can go around talking about child prostitution, and, you know, somehow that's supposed to be.
My cleaning crew is early. I'm going to close my door. Hey, I'm in a meeting right now. Thanks. So, yeah, okay. Well, that's a good defense of the And like I said, I enjoyed your attack on Keynes there. So um, another place I've learned to get, because one thing I've learned in life is follow experts. You listen to people in these chats on Reddit and debating with people on Twitter. It can be ridiculous, or like you said, you don't lose sleep over anonymous or random people making comments. So I look to follow experts. Twitter is great for that because an expert who is not, getting written up in magazines, you can follow directly on Twitter. Do you have any experts on Twitter who also, I mean, they don't have to post every day, but someone might be an expert and they never post on Twitter, so maybe that's not that valuable. But are there any people you follow that maybe lead? One thing I like is like if you shared a YouTube video, you said that's great, I'm going to watch it because I respect your opinion, and there's other people like that. Do you have any Twitter people that you think are good to follow and can lead to more learning, either in their comments or they share good resources?
Yeah, I mean, the people that I'm usually retweeting. So Pierre Rochard, Bitstein, Beauty on.
Hold on. Rothschild, I know of him. What was the next one?
Pierre Rochard, Bitstein.
Bitstein, Bitstein.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who else?
Beauty on.
How do you spell that?
Well, it's probably easier if I just write these. This is a pretty terrible use of voice conferencing to be spelling.
You think so? Well, if you in the comments here,
yeah.
if you can,
I'll send them to you by DM.
Okay, and then I'll post it in the comments for people watching this video. I'll put it in the comments.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay. Another criticism that I hear about Austrian economics versus Keynesian economics is they use models, and Austrian economists don't use models, and I'm sort of like not 100% sure what that means. One thing, and I was reading a Krugman macroeconomic book about how, well, what they do is they take a situation and hold everything constant and only have one variable. And then what happens? I'm like, how does that make sense? Like nothing is constant with one variable. So what are you even testing? But
well, I mean, to be fair, the idea of doing models is not that is not a bad thing. It's fine to hold things constant and think of the rest of the world. And think of just the effects of one thing in order to isolate it, because sometimes you're only interested in that one thing. So it's not like you're saying that the rest of the world doesn't matter, but we're just interested in this one relationship right now. So in other words, if I break your leg, all else being equal, you're going to be angry at me. But if I break your leg by saving your life from being killed by a truck and you just get out with a broken leg, well, you're going to be very happy at me. So, we're not saying that other things can't matter, but we're trying to understand the relationship of the thing itself. The problem with modern economists is that they put numbers on these models and they make them mathematical, and then they pretend that they tell us things about how the world should really work and that they're precise and that they can make predictions of how the world actually works. And that just never works out. And so the issue is that, economists use models as thought exercises. The Austrian economists, real economists in my opinion, use models as thought exercises just to help you with your understanding. Whereas the rest, they use mathematical models, with which they aim to model reality and try and deduce results that are far too complex to be valid.
Can you give an example of a model that you think is helpful that you would use to teach something, just to get my understanding exactly of what?
Well, so the example that I was giving you earlier about capital markets, interest rates, savings, and borrowing. I mean, that is an example of a capital market, and there is an example of it's a model wherein we just isolated the economy to these simple places where people are borrowing and lending.
In other words, if you lower interest rates, there'll be more borrowing, and that's what you're saying as a model. Whereas if Keynes said, well, if you lower it by 2%, it will increase borrowing by $42 billion, and that's where you get silly.
Exactly. Yes. So it's useful as a way to teach the concept. And of course, we don't presume that every time you're going to get a drop in interest rate, you're going to get an increase in borrowing, because there are many other factors that could come and affect things. The world is never that simple. But to just elucidate that one relationship, you use that model. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see if we have any questions here. Government to get in. Someone's asking about government. You know, they talk about, someone's asking about, I mean, maybe the question is, you know, what should the government do? He's sort of asking, should the government, you know, the government can't really get involved with Bitcoin because they can't control it. I feel like in the long run, the government will come out with a digital version. I don't know if you're familiar with Stellar Networks. I'm sure you think that the whole thing is a shitcoin, but it's sort of a digital a system where the existing banking system could be digitized. It's more decentralized. It's more open and it better than what we have now. But it supports fractional reserve banking. Got banks able to create their own tokens against their collateral. It's sort of a platform that, you know, that there'll be some sort of a competition, I assume, between Bitcoin and the existing system, and the existing system maybe digitizes. But do you have any thoughts on where you think this is going, like what the government is going to do or should do in response to Bitcoin growing?
I don't know what they're going to do, and I think it's pretty hard to predict what humans will do, because, you know, I don't know what they think, and I don't know how they think, and I don't know what they're trying to achieve. So, you know, that's a question you ask them. And the way that I see it, I'm just trying to examine the economics of it. So the way that I would look at it is this: we have an asset that is harder than other assets, and therefore I would expect that this asset is going to appreciate significantly, and that it's going to continue to gain more role in settling payments across the world. In other words, the way that I see it is we're already beginning to see a Bitcoin standard emerge, and that's the point of my book, that there's now a new alternative to central banks that's an international central bank of sort, that's decentralized, that exists on the internet, that doesn't have an address, and there's nobody to kill. And that's there, and, you know, you need to deal with it. It's going to be there. So the question is, you know, there is... I don't make this as a prediction, but I put it as a possibility. If Bitcoin continues to survive and grow and succeed and increase in value, you know, it's going to become a significant part of the global monetary system. So then governments are faced with a choice: either stay outside it, or fight it, or join it. So fighting it, I think, is futile. And, you know, there's an extensive discussion in my book of why I think it's just not likely to work. Secondly, ignoring it means that highly likely the effect of ignoring it will be that it will continue to grow while you won't. And so this is, in my opinion, you know, similar to the examples of hard money interacting with easy money in the world. So, you know, China and India tried to stay on the silver standard in the 19th century. And they said, you know, who cares about what the Europeans do? We're just going to do our own thing and stick to silver. And they paid heavily for it because the price of silver collapsed and the price of gold appreciated. So Europeans could come and buy things in China and India very cheaply. So
that's another quote. I've seen a lot of people say from your book, the cost of choosing the wrong hard money as for your economy in the long run is very expensive. Something, I mean, I'm not quoting you exactly.
You can't really isolate yourself from it. You know, you can't just say, I'm going to continue to be using the easy money and I don't care. You know, the people who lived in islands that had seashells did not switch to gold and government money because they wanted to or because they felt it was cooler. You know, they would have liked to stay on seashells for another 10,000 years if it was a matter of choice. This is not a consumer good where you get to go and decide, you know, I prefer this to that. You know, this is just like, we're not going to get transatlantic airplanes that are going to be made out of sticks and fabric, because that's just not what people are going to be using, you know. And I think we have something a little bit similar here.
Right. All right. And I assume because it's built on the Bitcoin network, Lightning Network, as and making Bitcoin, Bitcoin certainly doing well with its store of value use. And people say, well, I can't, what's the value? I can't go into Starbucks and buy my coffee with it. And that, that's just not here yet. Maybe it won't be forever or a long time, but Lightning Network seems to be a way to bring private instant transactions or small transactions to Bitcoin. Any thoughts on this, the Lightning Network? And
yeah, I mean, I think the Lightning Network is extremely interesting and promising, and I'm quite excited about seeing how it evolves. The idea of putting money on there, well, it's sort of similar to the how the gold standard worked. I mean, it could be really the way in which the Bitcoin standard comes into being, which is that you put your money into the Lightning channel, similar to putting it into the bank, where it's inaccessible for you. I mean, it's there at the bank, and then you can spend it, and the bank keeps a tally for you with that money. That's how the channels could work. Now, it's likely that it's going to continue to work and improve. It seems to be working fine now at a testnet level. Now, whether it works or succeeds in the long run, obviously still remains to be seen. We can never really be sure. I don't like to be, I never like to be touting new technology that's not been tried and tested and proven on the market yet. But, the way that I see it is, even if Lightning doesn't work, something like it will. Something like it will come about, because the solution, the question of making second layer payments it's relatively straightforward engineering question, and people are developing different solutions for this, and we're just going to see more and more of it over time. Unfortunately, I need to start to get going, David. This has been a pleasure, but I have a whole bunch of stuff to do today.
No, fabulous. Actually, you got through my questions. I was just doing the last ones on the chat. Again, I really appreciate you, your book, coming to talk with me. I'm not the biggest YouTuber out there. I have a few loyal followers, and I tell everybody I meet personally. So I appreciate this opportunity and the info you've given me and everything. And again, thanks. And I hope, and I'm helping. I talked to Bitcoin. We're trying to get Saifedean to come to Los Angeles. There's one guy, I think he's going to make it happen. He said he's, whatever, without getting into the details. And I've talked to another Bitcoin group, and he's willing to get his group to promote for this other guy's group, trying to get people sort of excited to maybe get it so that you come to Los Angeles.
Well, I'd love to get together in person. It would be great.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for everything. Good luck. Keep up the good work.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
See you in the Twitter sphere. Thank you.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. So that was great. Fun. He's a tough character. I like when I asked him, what do you think about a coin? I mean, he wouldn't entertain even my questions. He's just like, no, that's a real Bitcoin maximalist. I'm not as much on that. I'm a little bit like, I think there may be some use cases for some other things. We'll see. But I think, this industry could use some skepticism on the new projects. And boy, is it not fun to watch EOS on its launch and the troubles they're having. I mean, whatever. I don't want to call that thing a failed project yet. But, right now, even as much as I've been saying you should have at least 50% of your money into Bitcoin, right now. Lately, I'm feeling like, I wish I actually had more. It might be I feel like it's a little too late to start trading out of things that are down into Bitcoin, but, Bitcoin just keeps looking better and better. Just one more comment I'm reading here. Should be, how can you get more Bitcoin? Having 1 or 2 Bitcoin ain't going to make you. Well, this whole thing about, we're going to trade in shitcoins. Well, why don't you sell your Bitcoin, go to Vegas, I don't know, double down when you have an 11, you make money and come back and you buy more Bitcoin, right? What's the difference? I mean, unless you believe that another project is going to really gain a lot of value and gain it faster than Bitcoin. And remember, past performance is not an indicator of future performance. So last year, the big story was all the enthusiasm to all these new projects, and they did grow faster than Bitcoin last year. Okay, well, that's going to happen again next year. Hey, maybe. I don't think so. But just because it did last year doesn't mean people take that as a fact. Well, nothing can grow. Bitcoin can't grow as fast as other coins. Why do you say that? Because that's what happened last year. It's all about real value being created. And if you agree that these other coins aren't as good as Bitcoin, but their price is going to go up faster, that doesn't make sense. And one thing that is clear that I mean happens to so many people, happened to Safe, as he says people call him, happened to me. I've seen it happen to a lot of people. You discover Bitcoin, you think it's awesome, you buy some, you discover all of these other things, you get into them and think, Bitcoin, I love all these other ones. And then you know what happens? You come back to Bitcoin. It's happened to so many people. So why wouldn't it happen to the market overall? And if last, and I don't know what the time period is for people to sort of go from Bitcoin to everything else and then back to have that enthusiasm for Bitcoin. But if it's a year or so, we may see, and it only takes one of these look at the troubles EOS is having, and maybe they get things worked out, it's fine. But I'm just saying, what if it just continues to be like some of these things I'm reading? I'm like, is this thing for real? It looks like it's going to go down like the Titanic. But maybe not. I'm not trying to say it is. But if it did, let's say EOS sort of fails, and at some point people will just bail on it, or Bitcoin Cash, or what else is a big one? I don't know, Tron's, it's one of these big coins starts to collapse and people lose more faith, and meanwhile Bitcoin goes up. There could be a giant sucking sound in the other direction. So be careful. And Bitcoin, that you trade. Yes, I mean, I understand the point that people have traded in other things, made money, and they come back to Bitcoin. But the thing about investing, one thing I've learned is that you need to really believe in what you believe. Not the main reason is if you're like, I believe in Bitcoin. Price is down, falls, like I don't care. I don't lose sleep over it. Because I believe in it. And I don't care what happens to the price. I ain't selling it because it's not shaking my belief. Because I believe in it. So I'll hold it and I believe it'll eventually come up. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but at least I'm not worried about it. If you have a coin that you don't have great faith in and the price keeps going down and going down and going down, you end up selling at a low price. And so I've had this, I have some, when I have a stock and it's like, well, I think this thing's going to keep going up, but I don't believe that, I'm going to sell it in 2 months from now because it's going to be higher. But then I know to think, what if it doesn't keep going up? What if it falls? I'm going to sell at the low. So just get out of it now so I don't have that craziness. Like if you're just trading it because you think you're playing the game, that you can be in a difficult situation. And when everybody's panicking, you're like, I knew it. Oh, I should have sold. It is horrible. And when everybody's panicking and actually is maybe even too low to sell is when you dump. So, always be in something you really believe in. Don't play these games. If you want to play games, like go to Vegas or put it aside as gambling money, but it's not a real strategy. My Tom Brady as trainer, what's his name? Guerrero? I think that's his name. I'm meeting July 1. I'm meeting with him for a training. And yesterday I was on the beach, played Frisbee, surfed in waves, took long walks on the beach. I'm going to have to roll for an hour and a half today. My belief is BTC will revive eventually. So the question is really to accumulate more BTC. You do want to, but you don't leave BTC to accumulate BTC. Buy it, never sell it when you get it. And that's the only way to accumulate. All right. Well, I'm glad I got that interview. Let me just see if there's any other questions here. Someone said, does this guy look legit? First of all, which guy are you talking about? Saifedean. Listen, he wrote a book on Amazon. It's a new book with a ton of 5-star reviews. That's pretty legit. And check out the book if you want to judge if he's legit. Am I legit? I mean, I'm too legit to quit. Kidding me? I mean, I don't know what you define as legit. I've, e-commerce entrepreneur, made a lot of money over 20 years. Business I founded, started, ran. So that gives me some business education, internet. My business, I built it. I'm always been about decentralization. And now I've studied crypto economics now for a year. I just read and study this shit all the time. And I make these videos to help me learn. Am I legit? I mean, I don't know what you mean by legit, but you know, I think I'm kind of an expert. Thank you very much. Um, I think we answered that. We answered that. Who's looking forward to the G20? I don't know what that means. Okay, so looks like he hasn't taken a shower. Who, the other guy? I mean, Safe doesn't look like he took a shower. He's in Europe. That means it's later in the day, but who knows? Listen, it's not about looks. It's about knowledge. I've seen ugly people who are pretty damn smart, and I've seen really good-looking people. I went out in Hollywood for years. I want to do a video. Maybe I should do a video someday. How to party in Hollywood. I was quite an expert in that area. A lot of good-looking people who aren't too bright. So looks, when it comes to intelligence, looks doesn't matter. In fact, except for me, right? Because I'm really good-looking. Looks can be a contrarian indicator. In other words, the better looking someone is. I don't know if that's true. I'm not trying to be against good looking people, but I wouldn't judge intelligence and your ability to learn from someone based on their looks. So this interview did not change my opinion on how much to hold of Bitcoin. I'm still sticking with my 50% Bitcoin, 30% Stellar, 20% Ethereum. But I've been sort of lately a little feeling like I almost want 60% Bitcoin. But then again, maybe I'm just so in my own world. I don't know. I think that I'm sticking with that for now. If Bitcoin's the only one that survived and I had 50% in Bitcoin, you know what? It's good enough. Because remember, the numbers are so big. If you have all 50% in Bitcoin and the whole story plays out, you're going to make a lot of money. But what if sort of you want to be somewhat diversified? In Ethereum and Stellar, I think, do that. So I still like my 50% Bitcoin, 30% Stellar, 20% Ethereum. I saw your reply. Wait, the guy who wrote you that long essay comment on Ripple, I saw your reply, but I don't know what that means. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Hollywood party video. Yeah. It's funny. I used to tell people, like, I tell people, someone come and visit me. I'm like, listen, I can't go to a club with you, but this is how you get in. I used to train people. Like, Ty Lopez is not into crypto too early. He had this crypto meeting in October. And before that, I don't think he was that into it. And so he bought some. I don't think he's a huge investor in Bitcoin. And by the way, whoever wrote this question about this Ripple thing, you're going to have to rephrase the question. And then Hollywood party video. So anyways, for getting in a club, this is how you get into a club. You know what? I'm not going to get into it on this video, but it would probably be a funny video talking about how to take over Hollywood. I ruled Hollywood for like 2 years. And I'm not sure it's a noble goal or a useful goal. And in fact, I don't know. If I knew then what I knew now, maybe I could have handled it better because I'm going to save this for another video. But, I'm not sure that being at the top, the king of that scene has that much value unless you really use it for networking properly. But the problem is you get so caught up in the shallow, it's hard to grab the deep value when you're so focused on the surface. If you could do both, maybe, but I don't know. Tyler, I don't hang around. I used to be more friends with him before he was sort of super famous, and he's also constantly traveling around. He's so busy, and I used to know him more. And as far as women, I don't know what he's pretty private actually, and it's pretty down low. Even when I'm hanging out with him, sometimes you see there's somebody hanging around, and he'll mention maybe he's dating or something, but very low key. And I think when you're so busy traveling around, and he's all, his lifestyle is the business, but he's working all like sometimes I've hung out with him and like you're literally hanging out and all of a sudden, he'll do a snap and then he's walking around, he's just gone. Like he's sort of, I can imagine, difficult for a woman to have sort of what you would consider a traditional sort of relationship as long as he's I think if you're heavy into social media 24/7, and part of his social media attraction is, he's got beautiful women behind him. If you're his girlfriend, that takes a special someone to handle that. Uh, okay. I think that's it. How long have we been here? It's about an hour and a half. I'm starving. So, anyways, thanks for coming, everybody. And like I said, I'm excited that I got to ask those questions. And like I said, check out the book again. I'm not just trying to promote, Saifedean's, book for him. I think it's an important book. Changed my outlook on economics and crypto economics and Bitcoin. And I think it's a great book. So hope you enjoyed. Thank you. See you soon.